Okay, so here we're going to show you how to go about making some special trays. Starting with this one, a close fitting tray, you can see here that it extends down to just nearly the sulcus, a couple of millimetres above the sulcus, to allow for the impression material to come around the edge of the tray and cut out around those muscle attachments. Extends just across the border of the, just across the junction of the hard and soft palate, and the handle wants to be seated on the crest of the ridge and designed so that your fingers go down to the premolar region to distribute your load evenly when you're taking the impression in the patient's mouth. So to make one of these then, start off with a model of course, outline where you want the tray to extend to, unless it's been marked on the impression and that ink's transferred over onto the model, in which case it should already be done for you. So we're marking that extension, judging from the depth of the sulcus, stepping back a millimetre or two, as I say, just to allow that material to flow over the border of the tray without the tray poking through the impression material, so we're getting a nice border moulding of the zinc oxide usual typically. Now we need to think about the undercut and any prominent features that we can see on the model, but primarily the undercut. So if we've got rounded, bony, bulbous alveolar ridges, we can see some areas where if we put the acrylic blank on soft, push it into those areas, cure the material and then try and remove it, it will be stuck in those undercut areas. So we take some modelling wax and we fill those undercut areas with modelling wax, and then anything that's vulnerable to breaking, so here you can see the incisive papilla and the rugae, they're quite prominent. We're going to cover those with a little bit of wax as well, and that'll just allow the set material to be pulled off cleanly without damaging the model, and also allow a little bit of extra space for the impression material over those prominent features, just so we don't see the patient's anatomy poking through the impression material and contacting the tray too much. So some people suggest that even with these close fitting trays, which are of course designed to fit very snugly against the patient's mucosa, so that when we put the impression material in the tray, it records the mucosa while it's being compressed or squashed. So it's the tray that does that work in compressing the mucosa. Some people suggest that even with these close fitting trays that we have a thin amount of space to allow for the impression material, particularly on the vertical walls of the alveolar. So you can imagine between at the side of the tuberosities, for example, it's very easy for the impression material to be rubbed off the impression tray. So you could take a 0.5 millimetre sheet of wax, for example, so a stretched sheet of wax, or just put a thin layer of wax over with your knife to create that spacing if desired. Here we tend to just make the tray directly on the model. So this stuff is sodium alginate, or also referred to as cold mould seal, and that gets applied to the plaster and it stops the tray material sticking to the surface of the plaster model. This is the light box that we're going to cure the material in, so that the material comes soft and it's going to be put in there once we've shaped it. So it's light curing, so we need to keep it in a dark box when we're not using it. I'm just putting some Vaseline on my fingers because it's a little bit tacky, this material. So it comes in these dark boxes. Yeah, it comes in different colours and so on. Make sure the lid's on, otherwise the whole lot will cure. And then we line up the back edge of the blank with where we want the back edge of the tray to be, so along that junction of the hard and soft palate or just behind, And then very gently, particularly if the material's cold, we ease it down into the palette. It just needs time to just flow. It's easy to tear this material, and we don't want to thin it out too much, otherwise it'll be too weak. You will always have a crease somewhere, so you may as well make it where you're going to trim and make a gap or a V shape in the tray. So in the midline there's the labial frenal attachment where we're going to have to cut, which we're going to have to cut around. So I'll make the crease just there, and then just wait for it to relax. Make sure that it's staying down. Sometimes it just springs up a little, and once you're happy, you can take a knife, a cold knife, and just cut round to your desired extension. That's where we're cutting around the labial frenal attachment. Same on the other side, and peel the excess away. Try and keep this clean, because if you get bits and pieces in the material, they'll stay in there. And this bit that we're cutting off, we're going to use for a handle in a moment, so just leave it on your tissue so that it stays nice and clean. Where we've been cutting, just adapt back down. And these edges, the periphery of the tray, are going to need rounding. So do as much as you can while the material's soft. Anywhere that needs an extra trim, we can nip round. Like so. And now if everything's passive and lying against the model nicely, we can place the handle. So for the handle then, this is going to be this intraoral handle that we're producing, which needs to sit on the crest of the ridge, end in the premolar region on each side, so that your fingertips will be in that premolar region when you're taking an impression. And that will make sure that the seating of the tray is even. So we're going to put the base of the handle right on the crest of the ridge, and we're going to end somewhere about there. We don't have to be massively precise, but in that region. And then you need to blend the two materials together, so two fingers like so, or a finger and a thumb, squishing the two materials together, otherwise they'll just fall apart once we cure it. Making sure you're staying on top of the crest of the ridge, and then we want to just procline the handle slightly to give support to the lip. So we're aiming to get the handle where the natural teeth were. Blending the materials together again, stopping it in that premolar region, and then just tidying it up, trying to make it look symmetrical and even thickness all the way around, nice and rounded, so that when it's in the mouth, it's not going to catch at all. Something like that, and that will about do it. So it goes in the curing box now. It takes a couple of minutes in there. We'll pull it off, just turn it over and pop it in again, because the light doesn't penetrate all the way through the material, particularly where the handle is. So we'll give it another zap from the other side. And then once we're happy, just check it, make sure it's nice and hard. We're just going to work our way around the periphery, rounding it over, making it nice and smooth, so that the material can flow around that rounded edge. And we want it pretty thin. I'm going to use a micromotor, make sure the burr's all the way in, lock the chuck, that's the middle bit of the motor. When we're using these burrs, they rotate in a particular direction, and the material comes off towards you, and you want your thumb on the item that you're cutting, and you're going to pull towards you. It's the only cutting action you use. Don't try and cut on the reverse stroke, as it were. Just pull towards you like you're peeling a potato, and you can gradually work around, cutting any sharp edges off, making it nice and rounded. So it should be rounded, it should be relatively thin, so that it's not going to displace the cheek at all. And the extension wants to go down to just a couple of mils above the depth of the sulcus. The zinc oxide material is probably tough enough that it can support itself up to 3, possibly 4 millimeters thickness at a push. Ideally just a couple. So you can see where we're trimming back to there. And we'd carry on with that all the way around. Just check the fitting surface, make sure there's no sharp bits in there. If it's, when you take the tray on and off the model, if it's catching at all, you just want to double check that it's not too snug, otherwise it'll rub the patient's mouth, particularly adjacent to the tuberosities where we've got that bulbous part of bone. And for the lower, we do a pretty similar thing, extend it up over the retromolar pads, a couple of mils short of the depth of the sulcus again. Just check those lingual aspects, they often catch. So sometimes need adjusting on the fitting surface. Handle, similar idea, sitting on the crest of the ridge. On these lowers I always put an extra bit of material on top of the base just to toughen them up a bit, so they're sort of triangular in section, so they're nice and rigid. What you don't want is a tray breaking while you're using it. Okay, so they were both close fitting trays. This time we're looking at a space tray, so I've got the same model. If we're going to make a space tray, we adapt a layer of wax over the surface of the model, and then we build the tray over the top of that layer of wax. So this wax is about 1.5 millimeters thick, something like that. So if we're making a space tray for silicone, we'd put one of these sheets of wax down and build the tray over the top. If we're making a tray for alginate, alginate needs to be slightly thicker in section, about 3 millimeters, so we'd simply just put 2 sheets of wax over the model and then build the tray. So really the wax is just mocking a mock-up of the impression material. So when we're working with wax, we need to be high above the flame, getting it soft all the way through, trying to avoid melting the surface of the wax. See, I've done that a little bit here. Adapting it down to the midline and then up against the alveolar, over the crest and then down into the sulcus all the way around, firmly pushing it against the model, making sure it's adapted very well. And then we can take a knife and cut around to the extension that we've drawn on. So nice hot knife again. Cut around fairly quickly before your knife goes cold. And then we can peel that wax away. Rinse and repeat. Okay, just tidying that up. Make sure that it's adapted down nicely. And we've got clean edges. And then once we're happy, we can take one of the light curing blanks and build the tray over the top. So another sheet of material, bit of Vaseline on your fingers, adapting down. pinching at the front. Make sure it's nice and passive. If you find that it starts sticking to your fingers a little bit, just put a smear of Vaseline on your fingers and it'll just help. Trimming all the way around just to the extent of the wax, and then we'll tidy it up and we'll make a handle. With these spaced trays, typically we make an extra oral handle. So this looks more like a handle that you see on a stock tray, on a primary tray. So we just make a little square handle, rectangular handle. Haven't quite got enough. Just add a little bit. Make sure it's all kneaded together. And then once you've formed it into a rectangular shape, 3 or so millimeters thick, we can put it on the crest of the ridge again, putting it just there, and again blending the two materials together, smudging it into place, making sure that it's going to be firmly attached. And then we put a little step in it, so about the height of the natural teeth, and then out of the mouth. The idea that it come out somewhere in between the lips, the top and the bottom lips. Make mine a little bit long, didn't need that extra material, you see. And I tend to just fold the handle a little bit lengthways. You can see I just put my finger down the middle of it and just twist up the sides, and that just helps support it in the tray. Helps the handle stay horizontal when it goes into the light box. So we can pop it in there, pop the handle against the side of the box just to keep it upright, and then once we're happy, give that a blast. As before, we cure it twice, once from the top, once from underneath, and now you can see the tray, the finished tray, nice sturdy handle. Similar thing for the lower then, again a sheet of wax on, lower tray built over the top, thickened up across along the crest of the ridge, extra oral handle again, coming out of the mouth. You can just see the curve in it just to help it be supported in the light box. Okay,